What's good, BCI fam? Tate and Andy, we are back with another episode of the Members Only podcast. So before we go into this, I wanted to at least touch on a couple upcoming events that we got coming on the gym. I want to put on your radar. We got the Olympics coming up April 20th, so talk with your coaches. We're going to be throwing out some posts in the Facebook group and everything like that with some more details, but that is coming up. So be sure to sign up on the sign-up sheet and get ready to roll with that. And then not long after that, we got our summer challenge kicking off. So, topic for the day, we've spent a lot of time with the adult side of our business and a lot on the mindset. So me and Andy were thinking we start diving into the other half of the business, the athletes. Before we jump into a lot of the nitty gritty of that, Andy, do you kind of want to do a brief overview of your idea of what you wanted out of the athlete program at BCI, the different programs that we have? Anything specific you want to touch on before we dive into it?
I think the biggest thing is how our training program has evolved, over the past 20 years of me being a person of one, using my knowledge and experience to execute training sessions and build programs, versus now creating a predictable and repeatable training system that all coaches can plug into so that we can provide the type of results that we should be able to provide on a consistent basis when a program grows to that size. A lot of training businesses don't grow because the guy running the program usually is the guy with all the information. And, meatheads usually like to keep that information in their head. We don't like to put it on computers and make it easy for other people to access. But once we started growing the program, we realized that the information could not just live in my head. And we've worked collectively as a staff to really dial this training system in. And it's a work in progress. It'll always be something that we're iterating and improving because that's what our clients deserve. Another reason why we did this, quite frankly, is because there's not a lot of thought that's put into the training process. I'm just going to be honest with our clients because they're our clients. If you look at the way most people in the sport performance training community train young athletes, and I mean primarily like middle and high school, they literally just kind of put them through a workout of the day. They do some working out with weights, they might do some speed stuff, and a lot of it is just, random workouts. That's not how an athlete gets better.
Yeah.
An athlete gets better when they commit to a program, primarily a year-round program, that is periodized and planned to help them prepare for each aspect of the season. And you've got the off-season, you've got the preseason, and then you've also got the in-season, all of which are incredibly important. And because the sports performance market has failed to really do this well, what's happened is parents and athletes treat training as an intermittent thing. It's something that we do just for the short term in order to get ready for the season, when in reality that is the worst way to actually use training. And we'll talk about some of that today. So that's kind of the reason why we started really developing a training system so we could provide a predictable product to athletes as a whole. And we wanted this to be built around something really strong and research-based. And if you see, I use the acronym LTAD a lot. It stands for Long-Term Athletic Development. There is a body of research on this that is very, very significant. We know what it takes to ensure that an athlete's athleticism peaks at the right time when it matters. However, in America and in the private sports performance market, that really has not been the approach. People have tried to create the best 12 to 13-year-old. That doesn't really matter if that kid is injured and burnt out by the time he's 17. So we take a long game approach with our programming. In each one of our programs, development, acceleration, and elite are all based on long-term athletic development and what's required for those athletes when they're in that specific maturation window.
Yeah, I dig that. Kind of like what he was touching on, we have 3 different athlete programs that we run. Some starting with kids as young as the age of 8. That was more of our fundamental and developments class. And how would you describe that to a parent who's like, oh, you train 8-year-olds? Like, what are you doing with 8-year-olds at a sports performance gym?
We're doing what kids should get at school, and that's physical education. But there's a couple of things that are working against athletes that age. The three-headed monster is what I call it. Number one, there really is no real physical education in school anymore. And that's not, I'm not being critical of the teachers that are doing this because it's not them. We just quit pushing forward a physical education curriculum in this country.
Yeah.
It's just not a priority now, and we allow kids to opt out. And again, there's no real curriculum that they used to have. So that's problem number one. Is physical education is not really taught in school the way that it used to be. Number two is kids don't go outside and play a whole lot anymore. A lot of athleticism, believe it or not, was developed in your neighborhood, jumping fences, climbing trees, hanging out with friends, organizing yourself as a group of peers, and then playing sports. That's how kids literally got athletic when they were younger. Technology these days is too cool, and parents have essentially ruined the process because a lot of us just don't trust our kids to go out and organize themselves anymore. We try to take over, and I'm empathetic to that because all the awareness that I have, there's still a large part of me that wants to regulate all my child's athletic activity instead of just letting her explore.
Yeah.
But the third thing, and I would say it's probably the most damaging, is early sports specialization. And I understand why parents think it makes sense because it's like if I want little Johnny to be a great baseball player, we're going to start playing baseball as young as possible and we're going to focus on baseball. But that's because they don't really understand all the benefits you get from playing other sports and participating in a real physical education curriculum. If you just look at the sport of baseball, and I hope I don't hurt any baseball fans' feelings. I know you're a big baseball guy. Chris is a big baseball
big
guy.
skin.
But the fact is, it's not a sport that has a ton of athletic demands. It's very asymmetrical in nature. You're rotating in one direction over and over. You're throwing in one direction over and over. And if you're not doing activities that offset those imbalances, it leads to performance deficits. At this age, you should not be trying to create the best baseball player. You should not be trying to create the best football player or basketball player. You should be trying to create the best athlete that you can create.
Yeah.
When you become a great athlete, skill acquisition as it relates to swinging bats, throwing balls, shooting, all those things are a lot easier for you to pick up. So we designed our youth performance program to fill this gap. It was very obvious to myself and Coach Fields when we first came over that this was needed. He was working with a lot of elementary school kids for his job, and we just talked about how we were seeing a big shift. So when we started this program, it was to really do a service to children. But we also just realized that this is a great way to ensure that if these kids stay in our program, by the time they're 12 to 13 years old, they're going to have a much better foundation, and it'll be easier for us to teach them how to do things. In fact, we've had, like kids like Jaden Hill that play for Texas A&M. Like he started coming to the gym around 9 years old. Now he's playing college football. So we've seen kids go through this youth development program and then eventually go on to play at really high levels. So it also has that benefit as well. It sets you up to optimize your talent when it actually matters.
Yeah. I mean, we've had three of our OGs sign this year. I know we've kind of touched on them, but I mean, 3 kids that started in that 9 to 10 range that all signed with major D1 schools just a couple months ago.
Yep.
And those were baseball and softball players.
And I would, listen, you can talk to their parents. I think they would all tell you the same, but I think they would tell you that our program has been really, really valuable for them. Those kids have not had injuries. They've been able to offset some of the issues we talked about with playing baseball and softball because of the nature of that sport, and it's kept them consistently playing. The best ability is availability, and those kids have always been able to consistently play and play at a high level. And when we say D1, like we're talking big-time Power 5 schools. It's not like these kids are just going off to small schools.
Yeah. And then taking it from our development, because each stage, like you've already said, kind of requires a different approach.
Yep.
So then we get into our acceleration, more of our middle school group. So that could range from ages kind of at the 11 to 12 up to typically 13 or 14, depending on the given athlete. Now this one, we have a slightly different approach. Do you want to kind of dive into why specifically we train our middle school kids a little bit differently?
Yeah, so at this age, there is a case to be made that they could start looking into external loading, meaning lifting weights. All the other skills that were really important in youth development are still incredibly important. And that's why our system covers all of those things. But these athletes are now in what's called the learn to train window. So there are different windows that they talk about in the long-term athletic development research. And this is the learn to train window. So I want to point that out, that number one, our goal with this age of an athlete is to teach them how to train, to teach them how to lift properly. there's a heavy focus on technical execution and effort and intent, because those are the things that are going to help carry them later on. They have to know how to do this stuff right, and they have to know how to apply the right intention and effort to training sessions. Otherwise, you don't get out of them what you think you get out of them.
Yeah.
So this program is one that I really think is super important, because and the difficulty in this is that if kids don't have that developmental window really nailed down, so if we're seeing this kid for the first time, at 13 years old, like, it's really hard to go back and capture what he didn't get when he was 8 or 9. So because we understand those limitations, we've also built in things to that acceleration program that are going to help enhance athleticism. From our warm-up to our sprints and jumps, we build all those things in as well, even though the main focus is like teaching them how to train in regards to lifting weights.
Yeah. There's a lot of those kids, some middle schools start a little bit of lifting at school, some don't. But this is a great opportunity to prepare them for high school, because we know all high schools lift, and the form and stuff like that is a big part of what we want to do. We want to make sure the competency of the movements and everything like that is good, just because kids that age, if you've ever been around kids with that age, some of us kind of have a running joke. Some of them are like baby giraffes.
Yep.
They're hitting puberty, the bodies are starting to change, movements get very difficult. So I agree. This is a very important aspect of the athlete training that we do.
I'll say one more thing on that, and this, I mean this in the most respectful way, so I hope it's taken that way. There isn't a school really that has any business teaching young athletes how to lift weights, because none of the middle schools actually have real strength and conditioning coaches. In fact, many of the local high schools don't have real strength and conditioning coaches. For some reason, the city hasn't seen the value in investing in that, which I hope we can help shape and change in the future, because it's an advantage to us to be able to work with another professional, because that helps us ensure that we're not duplicating efforts or doing things that are going to make it harder for this kid to recover from his training. Because ultimately, that's what we are as strength and conditioning coaches. We are stress managers. So if you can talk to another professional that speaks the same language, it gives you the best chance to moderate and control effort and intensity. At the middle school level, again, it's the learn to train phase. So you have to have a very skilled practitioner who knows how to teach a wide range of relatively unathletic bodies how to move external loads. So learning how to train, I think, is better served in an environment where you have professionals that are actually trained to do that. And I don't know if there are any schools lifting anymore. There was a couple years ago. But what you mentioned about like teaching them how to train is a big value of kids participating in this program, because the most dangerous place your kid is ever going to go at school is the high school weight room. Yeah. That's just a fact. So teaching them how to take care of themselves will help prevent injury and nonsense at the middle school level, and then they'll be able to carry that into high school as well.
And when they know how to do it correctly, they're going to get the most out of what they're doing.
Yep.
And like you said, it's going to come at less cost of potential injury. So our middle school group, and then we get up to our high school group. So then it's ages 15 to 18, and we call that our elite program. So obviously we're starting to get more advanced. This is more of our competitive group. You want to talk about some of the big changes in the high school group versus the middle school group?
Well, this is the train to train window. So this is where kids are mature enough physically and often mentally and emotionally to train hard and really get after it. And that program is built around that. We allow kids to go heavier. There's a little bit more complexity in the exercise selection. And in general, we provide more of a competitive atmosphere in that group as a whole. This program is really designed to fill the gaps of what they're not getting at school. It can be a standalone program for an athlete that doesn't have strength and conditioning at school, or maybe participates in a sport where they don't have a strength and conditioning program. But the main reason that we built it is for really like the big three, like the football, baseball, and basketball athletes, that all of them are lifting at school. But if you talk to their coaches, they all have a very similar program. And I'm not even saying this is wrong. We could debate how it's executed, but most of these programs are built around bench, squatting, and deadlifting, and maybe some cleaning. And when I say cleaning, I mean Olympic lifting, not sweeping the gym floors. Yeah. Athletes aren't great at that.
No, they don't do that.
But those exercises are fantastic. They're great, but often young athletes are not as competent at those exercises as they should be to get the most out of them. So when they come to us, we're able to dial those things in more. We don't load them up the way that they do at school because those are competing interests, right? They need to be improving technique when they're with us and really pushing performance when they're at school. But we also fill gaps and we do things that we know all the local strength coaches, and there's 3 of them in this town. There's one at Westminster, Madison Academy, and Randolph. And we have great rapport with all of them because they know we know what we're doing. And in regards to those programs, we're able to talk to coaches and really fill the gaps that they can't get to. And that's more unilateral work, more core work, more multi-planar work, and then just a different exercise selection than they're being exposed to. This program for years and years and years has produced really high-level athletes, but it's also helped kids that were kind of on the cusp of being good, but they needed more athleticism to kind of, take that next step on whatever sport that they play. And this program is really great at helping athletes close that gap because number one, you're working out in racks where you look on the wall and you see like professional athletes actually trained here. Like, it's possible. Almost every day of the week in our high school groups, we've got kids that are going to play big-time college ball somewhere. So for a kid that's on the cusp really trying to get ahead, you also have that benefit. It's not like where he's at school where like everybody that's on the high school baseball, football, basketball team, I would suggest they're not exactly excited to be there every day.
Yeah.
They don't have the same level of competitive aspirations that certain kids have.
I remember our days in the high school weight room with the baseball team. It was
mad chaos and silliness, right?
Yeah, it was a lot more silliness than people in there really trying to get after it and get what you need to out of the weight room.
And at BCI, like, that's different. Listen, I know we got kids that, drag their butt in there too. They're kids. But the vast majority of the kids in our building really want to be there, and they really want to be there for a reason. And there's something magic about that environment.
Yeah.
And we could go deep into the nerdy details, but one of the major points that I want people to understand is that we did not design our program to be used intermittently.
Yes.
A couple years ago, I was invited to speak at the Physical Preparedness Summit, and that was a big event. A lot of the best coaches in the country got to speak, and I got to speak. And one of my slides talked about what I've coined the intermittent athlete versus the all-in athlete. The all-in athlete is a kid that trains year-round, all the time, no matter what. The frequency and intensity of those efforts is dictated by the sport that they play. So, for example, if they're playing a sport, they're coming to BCI 1 to 2 times. If they're not playing a sport, they're coming to BCI 2 to 3 times. But we want them in there year-round. And when I made this presentation, I put up a graphic, and it was of a kid who was intermittent, meaning he just used our program the 4 weeks or the 8 weeks before leading up to their football season. So 12 weeks. That's what it was based on. It was a 3-month option. This kid trained right before football season. Well, he did that every year for 4 years. All right. So in 4 years, he had 1 year of training with us. Now, this kid did not go on to play college ball, even though I would suggest he had potential to do so. And it wasn't because he didn't want to. He wanted to. It's just how they chose to approach the training process. Then another kid who was a very athletic kid, naturally, but he turned almost superhuman, and that is David Norris. David Norris stayed in our program from 8th grade to 12th grade. He accomplished some of the most impressive things you'll ever see a high school kid do when it comes to moving weight and being an athlete. I mean, just absolutely incredible things. And I put up his before picture and his after picture, and the fact that he trained 4 years long. He also received a Division I scholarship to play ball. And I could bucket kids that have been in our program for 20 years into those categories, and what you would see is the kids that use the program year-round, they simply do better. And that may not always mean that they're going to get a Division I scholarship, but they're certainly giving themselves a much better chance. Now, there might be some parent listening that's like, well, I don't care if my kid has a scholarship. And I'm right there with you. I don't care if my kid ever plays college sports. But a kid that treats fitness and performance as a consistent daily habit or weekly habit is going to get the benefits of that for the rest of their life. So if I use David as an example, when he got out of school, he chose to be a strength and conditioning coach. Now, he's no longer in the industry, but that's what he wanted to do. And he still lifts and he still trains. And I would suggest he's going to for the rest of his life because it became such a big part of his life. So it's beyond scholarships. It's beyond starting. It's that children need health and fitness. Children need physicality. We live in a world now that as technology enhances, there's less need to move your body, right? So we need to prioritize moving our bodies, and the children need it as bad as the adults.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Well, you kind of already went into the year-round, because that's a big question we get from a lot of parents. I mean, I know you spend the majority of the time in the sales room, but the few times that I have, that's always a big question. Oh, well, what do we do during the season?
Yep.
And
you find a way.
You find a way. You find a way.
You put it on the calendar and you make it a priority.
Yeah.
You don't treat it as something that you're going to fit into your life. And this goes for anybody listening. And we teach parents how to do this based on the sport they play, but we have a 7-day-a-week schedule. And if you're in our elite program, there's multiple time frames 5 days out of the week. So we've trained the most scheduled athletes in the world, and they can still find a way to get there 2 days a week if it's a priority and they don't have some other like family logistics that get in the way. Like if you've got 4 kids and 1 family car, like I get it. Like that you got to make some hard decisions there.
But yeah, and then just thinking about like the kid that you talked about earlier, like he's got 3 months out of the year, he's spending his off season leading up to the season, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with some of the periodic training versus the year-round training and some of the residual effects of when you take the training away. So since we've been a little bit more around the resistance training so far, what would you tell them? Say, hey, I just spent my last 3 months leading up to this season. I was 3 days a week getting in work, and then the season's getting ready to start. Ooh, I got to stop because I don't want to overwork. And I'm going to spend more time with football now. What is your first response to that?
That is a big mistake. All physical qualities that you are not pursuing an improvement in will eventually start to go backwards. There was a Russian sports scientist named Bondarchuk that wrote a lot of stuff about this. And one of the tables that he has pointed people to is what's called residual training effects. And depending on the quality that you're developing, they will only stick around so long. So there are 2 main qualities that are incredibly important for athletes to maintain throughout the entire season that they play. Number 1 is maximal strength, how much load that they can actually move, okay? Now, this is contextual to the age of the athlete we're talking about, but we won't go into all those details. But maximal strength only sticks around for about 30 days. So if you stop training in the summer and then you go into football, you will stay just as strong for about 30 days. And then things start to go backwards. Well, that's 4 weeks into the season. You probably want to be able to maintain your maximal strength.
Not even a quarter of your season.
Not even a quarter is gone. So if you don't train appropriately for maximal strength, you're going to miss that out. Now, some people might be saying, well, we lift weights at school. I hear you, and I accept that could be checking that box. It could. But in our experience, what we're aware of, it would be very hard for them to quantify that based on how loading percentages or loading parameters are handed out to most of the high school athletes in this area. I would exclude M.A. Randolph and Westminster from that. But training for maximal strength is incredibly important, and you really need it at the end of the season. And I don't care what sport you play. It is an unfair advantage for you if you are still as strong as you were at the end of the season as you were at the beginning. That's an unfair advantage.
Not only are you going to perform better, but you're going to help keep yourself from getting hurt.
100%, because your maximal strength potential does have this protective effect over injury. When you're getting weaker because you're not investing in strengthening your body, you are more susceptible to injury as a whole. But there's one other thing, and one other athletic quality, and it's really the granddaddy of them all. And the unfortunate thing is you lose it really fast, and that is maximal speed. If you are not training at 90% or above your maximal speed effort at least every 7 days, you are getting slower. Getting slower has all types of detriments when it comes to sport performance, okay? It is the number 1 quality that all coaches want to see, that all recruiters want, and it's the thing that helps separate you from competition. You might be saying again, well, we practice all the time and we do sprints in practice. Well, here's what I want to ask
From
you.
my experience,
yeah. If you ever played sports,
especially with baseball,
Yep.
our sprint work was, everyone won Oscars on those days.
That's right. They act like they're looking hard, and then sometimes the coaches don't know what they don't know. So it's a well-intentioned effort to work on speed. But if we were to use an example of something like what do y'all baseball poles or whatever it's called, like
poles, triangles.
All right, so you can run those as hard as you want, but the rest periods and the distance themselves ensure that you're never ever really going to hit max velocity and speed.
Yes.
And this happens in football. This happens in basketball.
Guys, sport. Pretty much every sport.
Athletes are great at making it look like they're going 100% because of the threat of punishment.
Right.
That often means they have no idea what really 100% is. The problem with that is you will find it in a game because in a game, it will dictate it. So, number one, you don't want to lose your speed. So you need to be hitting max velocity every 7 days. That's why we microdose speed every single day at BCI. But the other thing is this. Injury prevention comes down to one simple concept. Making sure that the force being attenuated through the tissues, the muscles, tendons, and ligaments, is significant enough and they can handle it. Okay, so it has to be significant enough for a stimulus and they have to be able to handle it so they don't create a rupture or a tear or an injury. Well, if almost all of your efforts in practice to get faster are done in a fatigue state with non-optimal rest periods and distances, you are not really preparing those tissues for the force that is going to be attenuated through them in a game or event. So by not training speed on a every week basis, and I do mean real speed training, not doing things that look like running, you are actually making yourself, again, more susceptible to injuries and tears. And kids that constantly pull hamstrings, constantly strain calves, they have a really hard time getting back because their first priority is to get back to play. Well, in that process of going from rehab to playing again, the return to play, a lot of them skip that in-between period where you have to hit 100% efforts. So then they get in a game, they hit a single, double, triple, whatever, and they got to really open it up, expose those tissues to a stress that it wasn't used to, and bam, now we're injured again. And you see this happen over and over and over. And it's really just a poor return to play strategy because really at the high school level, you don't have a staff that really understands how to manage all those variables.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, I don't want this to sound like I'm being negative on coaches in this area because we have a lot of respect and great relationships with tons of coaches in this area. In fact, I think it's unfair to put that on them. And that's why I'm such an advocate for every school having a real strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, and kind of to keep with the speed aspect, because a lot of people that come into our gym, athletes, that's one of the first things that they typically ask about or say that their athlete wants is to get faster.
Yep.
And sometimes one of my questions, just to get a gauge of what they know, is just like, well, what is speed to you? Like, what would you see as speed? Like, what are different categories of speed? Because I agree 100% about you got to sprint every single week. You got to sprint every single week. But you don't always just sprint straight forward in sport, unless you're a track athlete. That's one of the select times that you will only probably go straight forward.
Yep.
But if you look at a lot the ways that a lot of high schools train, they don't hit on some of these other categories, like your change of direction, and know how to train in those parameters. Do you want to touch on any of that specifically on how we do it?
Yeah. So we talk about the need for we call it agility. We can call it multi-directional speed. We can call it change of direction. But anything where you're going to accelerate, decelerate, and then have to re-accelerate again in another direction would fit into this bucket. And I mean, the agility world right now has become so popular that I could almost go to any mom and dad and say, hey, if I was going to be taking your son out on a football field or whatever to do an agility workout, and I asked you both to come over to my trunk and help me get the tools that we're going to use today out of my trunk, what do you think I'm going to pull out of my trunk? 98% of parents would say probably like one of those ladder things, like maybe some cones. And so we have boiled agility down to using gadgets and drills. And gadgets and drills do not build transferable skills. Again, the Russians, man, they figured so much stuff out. Like, if actually one good thing came out of communism, it was an understanding of sport performance, because they controlled athletes' life tremendously. And one of the things that they figured out was that predictable patterns do not transfer to the field or the court. So if we lay a ladder down and I tell your kid to do 1, 2, 1, 2 feet in, 1 foot out, 2 feet in, 1 foot out, he will get very good at that drill, and he will look more agile when he's doing that drill. However, it does not mean if he caught a ball in the flats and had to execute that icky shuffle-like move, that he would actually be able to do that in a game.
Right.
Because the drill environment is void of stimulation. You need stimulation to drive reactive agility. So the way that we approach this is we have a drill-based day. The drill day is just there to teach context and awareness of how to move. Like, if I'm in an athletic stance and I want to go to the right, there's 2 ways I can do that. I can step with my right foot and begin to shuffle, or I can push down into the left with my left foot to initiate that shuffle. The latter will cover ground faster and is more efficient. So drills are great at teaching concepts like that. But if we want whatever we're working on in that drill to become a transferable skill, we have to add an element of stimulus to things. Whether that is a mirror drill with another athlete, coach's audible or visual command. We've got a fancy lighting system that we use. And we use all of those on what we call our chaos day. So we bucket speed days as A days, our agility days are B days. So B1 is a drill-based day, B2 is a chaos day. The combination of those 2 things help bridge that gap between drill and skill, right? But this is a thing that a lot of people miss out on. And parents, they struggle to assess this because I'll be honest with you, there are some residual training improvements of a kid just doing some ladder drills and cone drills, especially when they're young.
Yeah.
So just to help with like general coordination, movement, warm-up, there is some value to that, okay? But nowhere near the value.
How hard people lean on it, it's
too much.
Yeah, it's too much.
But it's also because of, like, kids don't go out and play two-hand touch football anymore.
Yeah.
That used to be where you got your agility work, and there was stimulus and everything involved. Now parents know their kids aren't doing that, so they're just trying to replicate an environment where they can get something similar. And there are a lot of persuasive characters in our world that have access to YouTube, and they have ladders and cones, and they can put your kid through a lot of drills. And your kid might even get better, but it does not mean that that's what's best.
Yes.
And reactive agility is hands down what's best for athletes.
Yeah, and I kind of on a point of what you just touched on is not one specific thing is perfect for every athlete. So that being said, I see a lot of people learning and taking programs from pro athletes they see online. Just because you see Tyreek Hill out doing something don't mean your 12-year-old probably should.
Nor does it mean Tyreek Hill should be doing it, to be honest.
That's even a better point.
Yeah, talent hides a lot of silly training decisions.
Yeah, I tell you, I had probably 2 or 3 different adults before the preseason this last NFL season send me that video that we've seen of Christian McCaffrey's offseason work.
Yeah.
And they're like, a lot of this looks very similar.
Yeah, that's good training right there.
And if you watch some of his stuff, I mean, he trains very similar to a track athlete, very similar to a lot of those things. And he's not just out there running routes, using ladders. So just because you see someone on the internet doing something, there's so much context that goes into everything that you see in the training world. So just because you see something doesn't mean that it's something that everybody should do or you shouldn't be doing. Like, there's just so much context, and that's why it's good to have people like us around there where we can have those type of conversations with you.
Yeah, because almost everything in the strength and conditioning world really kind of came from the world of track. Okay, so like almost all strength and conditioning research started in the track and field world, and then it came downstream to the different sports. So a lot of the principles of training can be traced back to the track world. And Kristen McCafferty has a very good strength coach and runs an incredible off-season program, and that's why he's such a good athlete. He's been training that way since he was a youth. He trained that way when he was young. But with that being said, you might think, well, why not just run track? Well, honestly, what's so wild is that there is not a high school track program around that actually has a strength coach.
It's wild.
That's wild.
Wild.
There isn't a strength coach again, unless you go to Randolph, Westminster, or MA, and even then, those guys will tell you there's limitations to what they can do with those athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So at the high school level, just running track, I will tell you, is good for one thing: you're going to run fast and you're going to run often.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of value to that. However, we talked earlier about intent and effort. If you go watch a high school track practice, a lot of the drills that they do are valuable. But if the effort and intent is not coached and executed, it just becomes a long duration warm-up. That's it. Mm-hmm. So I would love for more athletes to value track, and I would love for more athletes or more coaches to advocate for having strength and conditioning coaches attached to track teams, because that could really improve that experience. Like, I would have my kid run track if I knew she could get that.
Yeah, that's one thing that, just knowing what I know now, if I could go back to high school, I may not be competitive in track, but that's one thing that I probably would have added to my routine, was doing some track, just purely for the sprinting aspect of it.
The sprinting aspect alone is worth it.
Yeah.
It really is. And getting faster moving in a straight line will translate into other things. There's things called the speed reserve and a host of other things where, like, getting fast in a straight line residually improves almost every other athletic quality, including strength. Now, when you're younger, you have to develop strength through external loading. You've got to develop the ability to put force into the ground and control that. But as you get older, what's wild, if you stay sprinting and you're in like a track-based world, like Christian McCafferty, for example, the amount of weightlifting he has to do right now is relatively minimal. He doesn't have to do a lot because his sprint work helps keep up his maximal force production capabilities. Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that I wish more people would understand, is just not all your power work needs to get done with the barbell. Like, you sprinting, med balls, stuff like that, there's so much good juice to that, and those are things included with our program.
Yeah, there's nothing sport-specific that ever happens in a weight room.
Correct.
I think that's worth talking about and mentioning. People say, well, is your training sport-specific? And nope,
what's your idea of specific baseball weight room training?
Well, and I think they think it has to be things that look like baseball skill. And that's not what it is. There's actually, again, a whole body of research on this. The topic is called dynamic correspondence. And it's what an exercise what boxes it has to check in order to be effective at improving a sports skill. So if anybody wants to go look up dynamic correspondence, you can get a better idea of how to classify exercises and their ability to transfer into a skill. But sprinting and jumping are a part of every sport, period. So if you really focus a lot on sprinting and jumping, which we do, you're going to improve your athleticism. And if you pair that up with good quality strength and conditioning, you now have an unfair advantage over the competition.
Yeah, agreed. All right, and then leading to the last one that I have written up today is a big one that I have a lot of parents ask me about, athletes ask me about, is the overtraining.
Yep.
Especially just like when they get in the season, they just worry, we're just doing too much. I worry about them doing too much, overtraining. So we have specific strategies in order for that. Just because we understand that, hey, we have zero control on what they do at school. Like, we got to work around that. So we have specific days and specific off-script guidance for that. Do you want to touch into that a little bit? So if a parent comes in and be like, my kid practices 4 days a week, they have 1 or 2 games a week, and then they're apparently lifting at school, I just worry about overtraining.
Yep.
Your response would be?
Well, usually I'm very empathetic to that. I understand it. I get it. But I often think parents are more aware of overtraining now than they have ever been. So it's kind of like when you want to buy a red car, all of a sudden you see a red car on the street all the time. So I think parents are very worried and focused on that, and they don't really understand how resilient their children are. Mm-hmm. However, there are some things you can do to make sure that you get the most out of your training and you do not create this overreaching or overtraining state. But before I go into that, I want to explain that I use the term overreaching intentionally. In order to create adaptation, we have to disrupt homeostasis. So we have to provide periods of time where we're training beyond your capability to recover from it immediately. We have to create overreaching. And when we do that, your body has to speed up all of its resources to recover, and then you adapt to that new level of stimulus, and that's how you become more physically resilient and more athletic. So there is a period of time where it is required, and your athlete has gone through this, whether you know it or not. Even with all your attempts to manage their activity, they're going to go through a period of overreaching and overtraining, so it's not always a bad thing to begin with. However, there's a couple things that we do. Number one, we provide a very flexible schedule to give parents options of how to move their days around. And when I meet with people, if they have a big concern about this, I help them make that decision based on what's called the high-low model of training. The term high and low refers to the impact that it has on your central nervous system, okay? So what I will do with a parent is have them lay out all their week, right? We have a game on this day. We've got skill training here. We want to come to BCI here and here. Based on what those things are, and I usually have to ask more questions to dig into this, I'll help them create this high-low model, meaning all the things that are really hard that they do, we put in the high day. So if a kid is a hard workout at school, in a parent's mind, it might be like, okay, we already worked out today, we'll just come work out at BCI tomorrow because he doesn't have a workout tomorrow. Well, that means there's zero recovery in those 2 days. But if we bucket all of his weightlifting into Monday, when he doesn't come to train on Tuesday, his body has more energy left over for recovery. So helping parents come up with a high-low strategy of how to organize their training is something that I do, and our schedule is really built to accommodate. The second thing is I tell every kid that, listen, amongst your team, like if you walked in and you're like, hey, coach, I'm kind of dead today. Like you might get marginalized.
Yeah.
You might get looked at as kind of a soft athlete. But in our world, you need to do that.
That's a requirement.
It's a requirement.
An athlete walks in, you're going to come to one of the coaches or come to me directly, and you're going to tell me exactly what you did at school today.
Yeah, we want to know what you did and how you're feeling from it. That way, if we need to make any modifications to your program that day, we can. And we have what we call OTS options, off the script options. So we can do movement-based circuits. We can do cardiac output work, which is basically sitting on a bike, breathing through your nose for 20 to 30 minutes, which that might be harder for some of our athletes to do than lifting weights, to be honest. But those things help facilitate recovery. They don't expend energy and they're not intense enough to where it pushes you further down into the recovery hole. So how we handle things up front and communicate with parents, we help them select the best schedule. We provide a flexible schedule, so if they have any things that get in the way, they're able to, change days. And then on a day-to-day, session-by-session basis, we can look at your daily readiness level when it comes, like we need to talk to you about what you had going on, and then give you another option that day that will help you recover as opposed to stress your body more.
Dig that. And I know a lot of times when we've talked to parents about that, you see that little sigh of relief when they hear that, because again, like you already touched on at high school, you might get pushed in a corner and be like, hey, you just being soft. But like we understand the body a little bit differently, so we know certain days like you don't need to push harder. That can do more damage that is actually going to help.
I'll say this real quick, and maybe this will be valuable for some parents listening though. I will tell you, I've seen a situation play out over and over and over again over the past 20 years where a mom and a dad will come in with their athlete and in front of their athlete start talking about this topic, like how hard it's going to be and how he's got all this going on and we just don't know if we can fit this in. And I think what they're trying to do is like assess the commitment level of their child. They're trying to like flush that out by talking about all the obstacles. But what you're doing is literally painting the picture of difficulty in that athlete's mind.
Yeah.
You are literally, like you know it's going to be difficult, but giving all those things to your child as reasons why it might be difficult up front is not as helpful as you may think. And you're building in an excuse for when they don't want to train.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a good reason to stop training because nobody wants to waste their money on something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that parents should take into consideration when they enroll their children in programs like this. Minimize the conversation about how difficult it's going to be. I'm not saying don't have an honest conversation about the commitment required. Absolutely do that. But don't build the case for them of why it's going to be so difficult. Set the schedule, set the standard, hold them to that.
Yeah.
Because guess what's going to happen at the next level? That's what their coach is
going to get hard.
do. If they play college ball, they're going to be very difficult life and experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if they've spent the past couple years learning how to deal with the stress of all that and to build training into their life and develop a positive relationship with managing other outside stressors, that's just going to work to their benefit.
I tell you, any high school kid currently that is at our facility at least 2-3 times a week, they're just going to school for 8 hours a day. They got practice, they may lift, and they come to our facility all on the same day. That kid right there, like whether he makes it to college or not, is already like creating like, hey, this stuff has to get done. And just being able to, like you were saying just a second ago, I'm kind of going mind blank on a word or two, but just being able to.
Wait, really, like the thing is that what happens is when a child does this, they're learning at a young age, the most important part of their life, that you have to prioritize things that matter to you. And if your health and fitness doesn't matter to you at a young age, it's not going to matter to you when you're 50 either.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can get it ingrained into kids at this age, now whether they play sports or not, at 40 and 50, they're still finding a way to invest in their health and their fitness, because there was never a standard set that this is something you fit in when you have time and it feels good. This is something that is required to be healthier and more athletic.
Yeah, which I think has a big payoff later on in life.
It 100% does.
It
100% does.
So yeah, that's the big overview. I know we dove into a couple specifics with our athlete program, but I know we've spent the majority of our episodes so far not really touching into our athletes, and that is a huge aspect of our business.
Yep.
So I really wanted to spend a little part of that. So after listening to this, if you have any specific questions or want us to spend more time on the speed aspect, the resistance training, year-round, whatever the case may be, we want to talk about that, because a lot of that stuff, a lot of people are confused because there's so much information out there on the internet. And if you don't know who to listen to and you're just getting random information on the internet, you're just going to be confused.
That's right.
So hopefully y'all are able to take a few good things from that. Anything specific from the overall, like any last notes you may want to give for an athlete that could be listening or an adult that could be listening on anything? Maybe the biggest takeaway that you want them to take from what we talked about today.
I'll leave you with this. Consistent training is the key to consistent success. Finding a way to show up consistently is the key. And we have a lot of evidence of how well that approach works, not just in our program, but across the sporting world as a whole. And if anybody wants to know any more about the nitty-gritty details behind what we do, we love talking about that stuff. So just reach out, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, I dig it. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. Out.